That old thing belongs in a museum. The sergeant's voice cut through the Norfolk Naval Base commissary as Catherine Mitchell reached for cereal on the top shelf. Her worn military cap drew stares and snickers from two young NCOs blocking her path. Probably bought it at a thrift store. The second one laughed, loud enough for nearby shoppers to hear. Fake veterans everywhere these days. Kate's left arm trembled as she gripped the cereal box. The sergeants stepped closer, emboldened by her silence. Other shoppers slowed, sensing confrontation. "Ma'am, you even serve?" the taller sergeant demanded, pointing at her cap. Kate's weathered fingers touched the nearly invisible pin on her cap, so faded only someone who knew exactly what to look for would recognize it. What they didn't know was that her silence carried the weight of rescue operations no one was allowed to discuss. The pin represented Ghost Company, a unit that officially never existed. Everything was about to change. If you believe no veteran should ever be treated this way, type "respect" in the comments. This story gets deeper. Dawn had broken over Norfolk Naval Base with maritime precision. Ships' horns echoed across the harbor as another day began for the world's largest naval station. Catherine Kate Mitchell moved through this carefully orchestrated routine like a shadow, both part of and separate from the naval world around her. At 58, she carried herself with the straight-backed posture that had been drilled into her decades ago, though her left arm moved stiffly with each motion, a private reminder of costs paid in places that didn't appear on any official maps. Her steel-gray hair hung loose around weathered features, her expression neutral as she navigated the busy commissary aisles. The worn cap sat perfectly on her head, a relic from Sergeant First Class Martinez. The fabric had faded from deep navy to something closer to gray in places, the edges frayed from years of wear. She wore it not out of necessity, but from habit and private remembrance. The morning air had carried the salt tang of the Chesapeake, and the cap was the first thing she had reached for. Inside the commissary bustled with the morning crowd. Young naval families pushed carts down aisles, retired chiefs congregated by the coffee station, and uniformed personnel grabbed breakfast sandwiches on their way to duty. Kate picked up a red shopping basket and moved deliberately through the store, consulting a neatly folded list from her pocket. She paused in the canned goods section, comparing prices with careful attention. Her fingers, marked by a surgical scar across the left wrist from shrapnel extraction, traced over the labels of soup cans, calculating the best value. Money was tighter these days. The VA benefits that should have sustained her had become entangled in bureaucratic questions about service records that officially did not exist. The two sergeants had been following her since the cereal aisle, their morning errands apparently forgotten in favor of this new entertainment. Sergeant Williams, the taller one with fresh chevrons gleaming under the fluorescent lights, whispered to his companion about wannabe veterans and stolen valor cases. "Look at that pin," Sergeant Johnson murmured, squinting at the nearly invisible emblem on Kate's cap. "Probably some made-up unit she found online." Kate selected 2 cans of soup and placed them in her basket, then moved down the aisle toward the pasta section. The sergeants followed, their comments growing incrementally bolder as they noted her continued silence. As she reached for a box of spaghetti on a high shelf, her cap shifted slightly, revealing more of the surgical scar on her left temple, a souvenir from the Kandahar rescue that had saved 28 civilians but cost Martinez his life. The movement also caused her to wince slightly, her left shoulder protesting the stretch. The physical therapist had warned her that full range of motion might never return, but Kate had learned to work around limitations long ago. "Think that's from actual service?" Sergeant Williams whispered, not quite quietly enough. "Or just trying to look the part?" "Hard to tell these days," Johnson replied. "Remember that guy last month claiming special ops when he couldn't even name basic equipment?" Kate's hand closed around the pasta box, her knuckles whitening briefly before she placed it in her basket. She reached into her jacket pocket for her grocery list, and as she did, a faded photograph slipped partially into view before being tucked away again. Only Kate knew. It showed 6 soldiers in desert camo, faces partially obscured by tactical gear, standing beside a helicopter with markings that had been deliberately obscured before the photo was developed. She continued through the commissary, adding items to her basket while the sergeants maintained their casual pursuit. When she stopped at the dairy case, a small group of junior enlisted personnel entered, laughing among themselves. One of the petty officers recognized the sergeants and offered a quick nod. "Morning, sergeants." "Morning," Williams said with a wave. "Early shopping run?" "Yes, Sergeant. Ship's mess needed restocking." Williams nodded toward Kate. "What do you think of that vintage fashion statement?" The petty officer glanced at Kate's cap, taking in the faded fabric and worn edges. He grinned, clearly sensing the direction his superior wanted the conversation to go. "Very retro, Sergeant. Almost looks authentic." "Almost" being the key word, Williams said, loud enough now that several other shoppers glanced their way. Kate closed the dairy case door, a carton of eggs now in her basket. She turned toward the checkout lanes, her slight limp becoming more pronounced as she changed direction. Long hours standing always aggravated the old injury, though she'd learned to disguise the weakness when necessary. "Classic stolen valor prep," Johnson said, no longer bothering to lower his voice. "Bet she's heading to the VA next to try for benefits." Kate's destination was indeed the VA office on the other side of the base, though not for the reasons they assumed. The quarterly appeal of her case was scheduled for 11 a.m., another attempt to have her service records partially unsealed so her medical claims could be processed. 4 previous attempts had ended with apologetic rejections from administrators who could not acknowledge operations that officially never happened. As she approached the checkout, the cashier, a retired Master Chief judging by the veteran's cap he wore, noticed her cap. His eyes lingered for a moment on the faded area where a unit patch had once been clearly visible. Now only the ghost of stitching remained, the embroidery worn away by years, until only those who knew exactly what to look for might recognize it. The cashier said nothing, simply scanning her items with practiced efficiency. Kate paid in cash, counting out bills carefully from a thin wallet. "Have a good day, ma'am," the cashier said as he handed her the receipt. "You too," Kate replied, her voice slightly husky from disuse. They were the first words she had spoken aloud all morning. With her purchases bagged, Kate headed toward customer service. The quarterly VA appeal required her to verify her address on base, a formality that never seemed to make it permanently into their system. Behind her, she could hear the sergeants had finished their own shopping and were now in line a few registers away. The customer service line moved slowly. Kate stood patiently, weight shifted to her right leg to ease the pressure on her left arm. Her mind drifted as she waited, carried back 19 years to another morning. The smell of diesel fuel and the sound of rotor blades cutting through Afghan air. "Martinez, extraction window is closing," the voice of her team leader came to her across the decades. "We either go now or we don't go at all." The memory dissolved as the customer service representative called, "Next!" Kate stepped forward to the counter, where a young woman with a name tag reading Jessica smiled professionally. "How can I help you today?" Jessica asked. "I need to verify my current address for base records," Kate said, sliding her ID toward the clerk. "Of course. Are you active duty or a dependent?" "Veteran," Kate answered. "I'll need to see your veteran ID card or DD-240, please." Kate knew this would happen, just as it happened every 3 months. "My service records are under special classification. I have a letter from the Department of Defense Records Office." She produced a folder containing several official-looking documents. Jessica looked uncertain, clearly not trained for this exception. "I'm sorry, but we need standard documentation. Let me call my supervisor." Behind her, Kate could hear the sergeants had finished checking out and were now standing nearby, watching the exchange with obvious interest. "Some people will claim anything for a military discount," Williams said, just loud enough to carry to those nearby. Several people chuckled, including one of the customer service representatives at the next counter over. The supervisor arrived, a middle-aged woman with an efficient manner. She examined Kate's paperwork with a frown. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but these documents don't meet our requirements for veteran status verification." "We need standard documentation." "These are the only documents I'm authorized to carry," Kate explained, her voice remaining even despite the familiar frustration building behind her calm facade. "Then I can't update your information in our system," the supervisor said apologetically. "You'll need to contact the VA directly." "That's why I'm here," Kate said. "The VA sent me to verify my address with base records before my appointment." The bureaucratic circle was one she had walked many times before. Her service with Ghost Company remained classified at a level that prevented normal documentation, yet the injuries she had sustained required ongoing medical care. Each denial added another layer of frustration to a process that seemed designed to make her give up. Behind her, the sergeants had drawn a small crowd with their commentary. "Classic case," Johnson was saying to an interested petty officer. "Wear something that looks military enough to pass a quick glance, make up some story about classified operations so no one can verify anything. People who do that should be prosecuted," the petty officer agreed, casting a judgmental glance toward Kate. The supervisor handed back Kate's folder. "I'm sorry I can't help you. You might try the main administration building instead." Kate accepted the folder, tucking it into her jacket's inner pocket. As she did, the edge of a challenge coin briefly became visible, not the mass-produced variety sold in base gift shops, but a rare, specialized design given only to members of units whose existence remained classified. "Thank you for your time," Kate said quietly. She collected her groceries and turned to leave, finding herself facing the small crowd that had gathered. The expressions ranged from outright mockery from the sergeants to uncomfortable embarrassment from those who sensed they might be witnessing something they didn't fully understand. Kate straightened her shoulders, the ingrained military bearing asserting itself automatically. She walked toward the exit, maintaining her dignity despite the whispers that followed her. The automatic doors slid open ahead, revealing the bright morning sunlight beyond. For a moment, Kate paused in the threshold, her hand unconsciously rising to touch the worn cap. 19 years of carrying Martinez's memory. 19 years of bureaucratic battles. 19 years of silence about operations that had saved lives but officially never happened. The morning breeze from the Chesapeake carried the salt smell she had grown to love during her years stationed here. Ships' horns echoed across the harbor, and she could see the imposing silhouettes of destroyers and carriers anchored in the distance. This had been her world once, before Ghost Company, before Afghanistan, before everything changed. She adjusted the cap slightly, feeling the soft fabric that Martinez had worn during their final mission together. He had insisted she take it when the shrapnel tore through his chest, had pressed it into her hands with his dying breath, and made her promise to remember them all. The ones who came back, and the ones who didn't. The pin on the cap caught a glint of morning light, the nearly invisible emblem that had once marked them as members of an elite rescue unit. 6 soldiers who had pulled off impossible extractions in places the government would never acknowledge. Now she was the only one left to remember. Kate squared her shoulders and stepped through the automatic doors into the morning sun. Behind her, the whispers and mocking laughter faded, but the weight of their judgment lingered. Another day, another battle in a war that never seemed to end. She had nearly cleared the entrance when the doors slid open again behind her. Admiral Susan Crawford entered the commissary flanked by 2 aides, her attention focused on a tablet in her hands. She was a compact woman with close-cropped silver hair and the bearing of someone who had spent a lifetime in command of naval vessels and personnel. "I want those deployment numbers recalculated by this afternoon," she was saying to the aide on her right. "The committee needs accurate projections, not optimistic estimates." "Yes, ma'am," the aide replied, making a note on his tablet. Kate automatically shifted to the side to let them pass, tucking her grocery bags closer to her body, her eyes downcast in the instinctive deference civilians often adopt around high-ranking officers. She had nearly cleared their path when Admiral Crawford glanced up from her tablet. Her eyes passed over Kate in the casual assessment of a security-conscious officer. Then she stopped. Her body went rigid, the tablet in her hand forgotten, as her gaze locked onto the nearly invisible pin above Kate's heart. It was nothing more than a shadow on the fabric now, the embroidery worn away until only the faintest outline remained, a ghost of stitches that had once formed a symbol known to very few. The Admiral's aides continued 2 steps before realizing their commanding officer had stopped. They turned, confused expressions giving way to concern as they observed the Admiral's reaction. The commissary's ambient noise seemed to dim as Admiral Crawford handed her tablet to the nearest aide without taking her eyes off Kate. Then, with precision that came from decades of service, she snapped to attention and rendered a perfect formal salute. Kate froze, her grocery bags suddenly heavy in her hands. The salute in civilian settings was against protocol. The recognition it represented was unprecedented. The moment stretched, the Admiral's salute unwavering. Around them, conversations died as naval personnel noticed the extraordinary scene unfolding. The sergeants who had been mocking Kate moments earlier fell silent, their expressions shifting from amusement to confusion. With practiced muscle memory that transcended the years, Kate carefully transferred her grocery bags to her right hand and returned the salute with perfect military precision. Her movements transformed from the cautious motions of a civilian to the crisp certainty of a soldier. "Sergeant First Class Mitchell," Admiral Crawford said, her voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "Ghost Company, Kandahar Rescue Operation." It was both a statement and a question, an acknowledgement and a verification. 19 years collapsed between them, compressing time until that day in the Afghan mountains felt as immediate as yesterday. "Yes, ma'am," Kate confirmed, her voice stronger now. The Admiral lowered her salute, and Kate followed suit. The commissary had gone completely still, all attention focused on the unexpected exchange between a flag officer and a woman in a worn military cap. "At ease, Sergeant," the Admiral said, though Kate held no official rank anymore. "Thank you, ma'am," she replied, decades of military discipline guiding her response. Admiral Crawford dismissed her aides with a short gesture. "Wait for me outside." Her tone made it clear this was not a request to be questioned. The aides exchanged glances but promptly headed for the exit, leaving the Admiral alone with Kate in the midst of the growing crowd of onlookers. "It was your unit that coordinated the civilian extraction," the Admiral said, her voice quieter now but still clear enough for those nearby to hear. 28 hostages, including my nephew. Your team created the corridor that got them all out alive." Kate nodded once, the memories she usually kept carefully contained now surging to the surface. The mountain operation, the Taliban fighters closing in, the impossible choices made by her 6-person team to create an escape route for the diplomatic hostages. "That pin," the Admiral continued, gesturing to the faded area on Kate's cap, "hasn't been authorized for wear since the unit was disbanded. Official records list the operation as a training exercise that went wrong." The crowd began to understand they were witnessing something extraordinary, a classified operation being acknowledged in public for perhaps the first time. The sergeants who had been mocking Kate stood frozen, their faces draining of color as the implications of their earlier behavior became clear. "How many of your team made it home from that operation, Sergeant?" the Admiral asked, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer. "3 of us, ma'am," Kate said softly. "I'm the last one now." Admiral Crawford absorbed this information with a slight tightening around her eyes, the only visible sign of emotion. "Would you join me for coffee, Sergeant?" She gestured toward the small cafe area in the corner of the commissary. "Of course, ma'am," Kate replied. As they moved toward the cafe, the crowd parted silently, respect and curiosity mingling in the wake of the revelation. The sergeants stood rooted to the spot, mortification evident in their rigid postures. The Admiral and Kate settled at a small table in the corner, away from most of the onlookers. A young seaman working at the cafe counter rushed over to take their order, clearly flustered by the Admiral's presence. "Just coffee, Black," the Admiral said. "The same," Kate added. When the seaman retreated, Admiral Crawford leaned forward. "I've often wondered what happened to your team after the debriefing. Everything went into classified files so deep even I couldn't access them anymore." "That was by design, ma'am," Kate said. "Ghost Company operated under triple-blind protocols, mission parameters, team composition, even our existence was compartmentalized." "For good reason," the Admiral acknowledged. That operation prevented a diplomatic catastrophe that could have led to open war. The seamen returned with their coffees, setting them down with nervous care before retreating. The admiral waited until they were alone again before continuing. "What brings you to Norfolk, Sergeant? Last intelligence placed you retired in Virginia Beach." "Medical appeal, ma'am?" Kate answered, her professional demeanor hiding the frustration of countless rejected claims. "I've been trying to get the VA to recognize injuries sustained during operations without being able to reference the operations themselves. Catch-22 of the highest order," the admiral concluded, understanding immediately. "Yes, ma'am. My left arm and shoulder were damaged during the Kandahar extraction. The medical records exist, but they're classified at a level the VA administrators can't access." Admiral Crawford's expression hardened. "That ends today." She pulled out her phone and dialed with quick, decisive movements. "This is Admiral Crawford. I need immediate action on a personnel matter." She paused, listening. "Yes, that level of clearance. My authorization code is Alpha 7 Bravo Delta 9. Another pause as she listened to the response. "I need everything we have on Ghost Company declassified immediately, specifically relating to personnel injuries sustained during the Kandahar Operation, 2006. Priority directive." She listened once more. "Yes, I understand the protocols. Override them. This is a direct order." She ended the call and returned the phone to her pocket, her gaze meeting Kate's. "Bureaucracy moves slowly, especially when it comes to declassification. But my office will expedite everything we can. Your service will not continue to go unrecognized, Sergeant." "Thank you, ma'am," Kate said, her composure maintained despite the surge of emotion her words triggered. After years of fighting the system alone, the simple act of recognition felt almost overwhelming. Their conversation was interrupted as the two sergeants approached the table, their earlier confidence replaced by evident discomfort. They stopped at a respectful distance, coming to attention before the admiral. "Ma'am, request permission to speak," Williams said, his voice tightly controlled. Admiral Crawford glanced at Kate, a silent question in her eyes. She gave a small nod. "Granted," the admiral said. Williams turned to Kate. "Ma'am, I wish to apologize for my extremely inappropriate and disrespectful behavior. There is no excuse for how we spoke to you or about you." Johnson joined in. "We acted shamefully, ma'am. We failed to uphold the values of the Navy and the respect owed to all service members, especially those who served in classified operations." Kate studied them for a moment, seeing beyond their current embarrassment to the sailors they might become. "You couldn't have known," she said finally. "That was the point of units like mine. We operated in shadows so others could work in the light. That doesn't excuse our behavior," Williams said. "We judged based on appearances, not understanding what we were seeing. A lesson worth learning early in your careers," Admiral Crawford observed, her tone making it clear that while the apology was accepted, the incident would not be forgotten. "Yes, ma'am," both sergeants replied in unison. "Return to your duties." The admiral dismissed them. As the sergeants departed, word of what had transpired had clearly spread through the commissary. Veterans began approaching the table, not interrupting, but offering quiet nods of respect or simple acknowledgments as they passed. The atmosphere had transformed from one of mockery to profound respect. Admiral Crawford checked her watch. "I have a meeting in 20 minutes I can't postpone, but I want you to come to my office afterward. We have much to discuss about ensuring you receive the benefits and recognition you're entitled to." "That's not necessary, ma'am," Kate began. "It absolutely is," the admiral countered firmly. "What your team did saved lives, including my nephew's. The classification was necessary, but allowing that same classification to deny you proper medical care and benefits is unacceptable. Some forms of gratitude shouldn't remain classified." Kate felt something shift inside her chest, a weight she had carried for 19 years beginning to lift. For the first time since Afghanistan, someone with real authority had acknowledged not just her service, but the cost of keeping it hidden. "Thank you, ma'am," she said quietly, "for seeing what others couldn't." Admiral Crawford stood, and Kate followed suit. "I'll have my aide contact you this afternoon with the details for your appointment. We'll get this resolved, Sergeant. That's a promise. As they prepared to leave the cafe, the commissary had returned to its normal operations, though respectful glances continued to follow them. The transformation was complete, from mockery to recognition, from invisible to honored. After 19 years of silence, Catherine Kate Mitchell was finally coming home. Thank you for typing respect. Subscribe for more stories of dignity and hidden heroes. Support our mission through Buy Me a Coffee. Link in the first pinned comment. Until next time, honor never fades.